They closed the lid on hope the same morning. A ghost in polished leather walked back into my life. He wore a suit that smelled like money into a church that smelled like lilies, and sat beside me as if 15 years hadn't calcified into bone-deep silence. I was 65 and holding onto the edge of the pew like it might anchor me to the earth when Daniel Reed strode down the aisle of St. Paul's in Lincoln Park. Head high, jaw set, flanked by pitying glances from people who didn't know better. He slipped into the front row, right next to me, like there'd never been a night. He packed a duffel bag and walked out while our little girl slept with crayons still on her hands. "Hell," he whispered, using the nickname I hadn't heard since Chicago, had 2 baseball curses. "We need to discuss Lily's estate." The word estate hit like a snapped violin string. My daughter, my Lily, lay 6 feet to my left in a casket, the color of wet slate, the same color as Lake Michigan on a February morning. She was 23, gone from leukemia so fast it felt like a power outage in a hospital, sudden, cruel, and fatal to everything depending on it. "We don't need to discuss anything," I said without moving my lips. He leaned closer. I could smell the same cedar cologne he'd worn when we were newly married and broke, when dates meant cheap tacos in Pilsen and talking about dreams we couldn't afford. "I have standing," he whispered. "I'm her father." "You're a donor," I said. "Standing requires presence." The pipe organ sighed into a hymn, old wood groaning, candles wavering. I stared at the small mole on Lily's cheek, a beauty mark she used to joke about, covering with different colors of glitter when she was a kid, and swallowed the scream living in my throat. The pastor spoke about my daughter's brilliance, about how she taught herself to code at 12 on a thrift store laptop and founded a company called Aegis Chart by 19, a system for encrypting medical records without burying them. Hospitals signed on first in Chicago, Northwestern, Rush, then across the country. Investors came next. Forbes snapped her in black and white on a rooftop in the West Loop and called her the firewall with a human heart. And Daniel nodded along like he'd been there for any of it. After the benediction, he turned to me. "Hell, let's be reasonable." Reasonable. Like the summer I worked double shifts at the outpatient clinic to cover Lily's STEM camp. Like the winter I slept on her hospital chair for 6 months, learning the rhythm of machines until their beeps became a song I heard in my dreams. When the final amen scattered, Daniel stood and became a host at his own performance. Handshakes, shoulder squeezes, an earnest nod when someone mentioned Lily's first big contract in Dallas. He introduced himself as Lily's dad to people who'd never seen him at a single birthday party since she was 8. The grief in the room tried its best to make space for him. Grief is generous like that, but lies have edges. I felt them against my ribs. Outside, the wind came off the lake like a blade, March pretending not to be winter, Chicago doing what Chicago always does, testing you to see if you'll stay. I watched Daniel light a cigarette he didn't smoke 15 years ago, watched the ember flare, watched him watch the news van idle across from the church. Of course there were cameras. The world likes a tragic prodigy more than it likes oxygen. At the reception, people pressed napkins into my hands, plates of food I didn't want, stories I wanted to build a house from. Lily showed me how to Venmo my nephew. He laughed, thought I was ancient. Lily stayed late at the free clinic and debugged their scheduling app because their IT kid had mono. Lily bought winter coats for the whole oncology ward one December. everyone with a little neon tag that said, "Keep going." Daniel hovered, that expensive suit skimming past casseroles and condolences. "Helen," he murmured once more, cornering me near the coffee urn. "We can avoid a fight." "What you avoid and what you deserve," I said, "are not the same." He blinked, 2 quick flutters, the look of a man calculating a new angle. "It's a significant sum," he said finally. 35. As if saying the number out loud would make it crumble off the edge of my moral cliff, as if attaching commas to grief made it negotiable. That night, I sat at the small oak table in my kitchen in Ravenswood, the one Lily used to cover in Post-its when she was mapping her code, and held a mug of decaf like it could warm anything that mattered. The house smelled like old books and Murphy's oil soap. Photos covered the fridge. Lily at 12 with braces and a t-shirt that read, "Code like a girl." Lily at 19, outside 1871 with a fierce messy bun and a grin large enough to deflect bullets. Lily at 22, thin from chemo, eyes blazing as she explained Aegis chart to a boardroom of men old enough to be her grandfathers. I had made that boardroom coffee. I had pressed my hand against the glass and prayed to everything and nothing at all. The doorbell rang. I knew who it was before I stood up. Daniel stood on my porch with a man whose suit cost as much as my mortgage payment in 1998 and a leather briefcase that had its own weather system. "Helen," Daniel said, smiling like a politician who just won by 3 votes. "This is Matthew Klein, my attorney. We should have a civilized conversation." I stared at the lawyer's shoes. No snow salt, no city scars. He looked uncomfortable, like someone had asked him to negotiate with a thunderstorm. "Mrs. Parker," he said, "our condolences. We don't want this to be adversarial." "Then go home," I said, and opened the door because if this filth was going to happen, it was going to happen on my terms, in my home, under my framed pictures and my rules. They sat on my living room couch like they were afraid to crease their futures. Daniel's gaze drifted to the piano against the far wall, to the sheet music Lily annotated in pencil, little hearts above the rests, as if silence deserved a shape. "Mrs. Parker," Klein began, lacing his fingers, "Illinois intestacy and probate." "She wrote a will," I said. Klein paused. Daniel's head jerked toward him like a fish discovering the surface. She did?" "Oh, Lily planned," I said, and it was like tasting something sweet after weeks of metal. "She planned for everything." Klein cleared his throat. "Even so, Mr. Reed's parental standing—" "Standing," I repeated. Interesting word for a man who hasn't stood anywhere near his child in a decade and a half. Klein's eyes flicked toward Daniel, a quick clinical movement. "Were there any court orders, Mrs. Parker?" he asked. "Pertaining to Mr. Reed's rights?" Daniel's jaw tensed. "Matt." Klein did not look away from me. "Any modifications, terminations, custody?" "You're asking me," I said softly. "If my ex-husband signed away his daughter for the price of a decent used pickup." Klein's silence was a confession he couldn't deliver. Daniel stood. "Helen, out," I said. "Both of you." They went. They had to. A woman who has already buried the best part of her heart cannot be moved by Latin. The house settled around me, quiet as a held breath. Somewhere on Cicero, a siren rose and faded. I opened the drawer where Lily kept things I wasn't allowed to organize, because my organizing meant I tucked life into containers until it couldn't breathe, and found the manila envelope with my name written in her tidy, fearless hand. "Mom," it said on the front, The O, a perfect circle, for when the past forgets how to mind its own business. Inside was a letter. I did not make it past the first line before I started to cry hard enough to fold. At the end of part 1 only, I'll say this the way I'd say it if we were sitting at this same kitchen table. If you're here with me, tell me where you're listening from. Sometimes knowing where other hearts are beating helps. If this story found you, give it a small nod, like the kind you give strangers on the L. And if you want more, you know where to find me. I'll keep telling the truth as long as I have breath. The first time Lily broke a rule, she was 8 and had a gap-toothed smile she used like a hall pass. I found her under the dining room table with a tangle of cords and my old Dell balanced on a stack of cookbooks. The dining room smelled like lemon oil and defiance. "What are you doing?" I asked, bending down until my knees popped like popcorn. "Making it faster," she said without looking up. "It's tired." "Computers don't get tired," I said, because that was the day I learned the word tired can mean a lot of things. She blew a curl off her forehead. "People make them tired when they don't treat them right." By then, Daniel had already started living half a life with us and half a life somewhere else. He returned home with the smell of bourbon threaded through his breath mints, with a 1,000-yard stare you only see on people in war stories. I thought he was lost. I didn't yet know he was leaving. The night he left, the Cubs were losing by 5 and Lily had built a blanket fort so elaborate it had zoning issues. She named it the safe part and insisted we crawl through a tunnel of quilts to enter. He stood in the doorway with his duffel and said, "I can't do this anymore," like he was talking about dry January. "What about Lily?" I asked. "She'll be better with you," he said, like he was donating us to goodwill. He kissed her hair and walked out. I swear I heard the world change pitch. After that, I learned the exact number of minutes it took to close the clinic, catch the brown line, and sprint the last 4 blocks home. I learned how to make spaghetti 3 ways with 1 pot and how to braid hair in the dark. I learned my own softness had teeth. Lily learned the shape of an ache she would carry forward like a spare part. She didn't ask about him after the first year. It wasn't forgiveness, it was conservation. At 12, she came home from Lane Tech with a flyer for a weekend coding workshop. "It's $75, she said, like she was confessing to arson. I looked at our bank app and saw a number that felt like a dare. "We'll figure it out," I told her. We had yard sales until our block smelled like old lamps. Lily sold her childhood Lego sets with a ceremony I still see when I close my eyes. "I'll build something else," she said, and for once I believed in a sentence the way I used to believe in church. At 19, she sat me down at the same kitchen table with a pitch deck printed on cheap paper. "Aegis chart," she said, the word clean on her tongue. "Hospitals lock up our data so hard nobody can use it when it matters, or they leave it loose enough to get stolen by any idiot with a stolen password. I can make a system that keeps the door locked and the right people holding keys." "You're already in college," I said. "Scholarship, honey. You worked your tail off." "I did," she said gently, "and I learned what I needed to build this." She'd been accepted to an accelerator at 1871, a place I imagined as a cross between a lab and a city of glass. They give me mentors, office hours, seed money if I don't screw it up. I went silent. The refrigerator hummed its old song. Outside, a bus sighed at the corner like it had something to confess. "My professor said I'm ready," she added, as if reading my fear line by line. "He doesn't hand out compliments like Halloween candy. I thought about the day before when Mrs. Alvarez at the clinic missed her appointment because her chart had been misplaced, and the hospital insisted she reschedule because their system had maintenance. The maintenance cost Mrs. Alvarez 2 days of pain and an infection that should have been caught 3 weeks earlier. "Okay," I said. "Let's build the door and the keys." When Edge's chart landed its first pilot with a Southside hospital, we ate takeout enchiladas on the floor because furniture suddenly felt too sure of itself. Lily showed me dashboards that pulsed like city grids. "Permission sets," she said, pointing, "like bouncers with good instincts. If you're not on the list, you see nothing. If you are, the right piece lights up exactly when you need it." "But like a lighthouse," I said, and she grinned like I'd found a secret passage to her brain. Success came in increments. A grant here, a contract there, a photo op at Navy Pier with the mayor's office where Lily refused the glass of champagne and asked for water like she had a game in the morning. Then, out of nowhere, like a siren you didn't hear until it was terrible, came the lab results. "I'm tired," she had said, her hand on her chest. I thought it was the pace. We all thought it was the pace. Turns out it was something that turned the language of her blood into a foreign alphabet. We fought like hell. We measured time in transfusions and platelets. She worked because working kept the edges of the world from fraying. She wrote code with a needle in her arm and cracked a joke when the nurse knocked over a Sharps container. "Ominous," she murmured, dry as the Sahara. In the weeks after the diagnosis, creation became a different animal in her hands. She double-checked structures. She revised her will. I watched her make lists that had a clarity my grief couldn't bear to look at for more than 10 seconds at a time. She asked me where we kept the old legal folder with our divorce papers. "Bottom drawer," I said, my stomach falling through the floor. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. "Mom," she said a night later, when the radiation made the house smell faintly like ozone and burned toast, "do you remember the year you filed for back child support?" Of course I did. I remembered the lawyer downtown in a building with marble floors and security guards who looked bored until they weren't. I remembered the paperwork. I remembered the shrug, the worst part. "Changed circumstances," they said, as if circumstances were a coat you could swap when the weather turned. "Don't worry," she said, a softness in her voice she used when she was trying to make bad news feel like a blanket. "I'm handling everything." The manila envelope in my drawer had weight now beyond paper. I read her letter. "Mom, if you're reading this, it means Daniel showed up for the only thing he ever shows up for. I hired a private investigator when I started Aegis Chart because I wanted to know what my last name meant outside our house. He found more than I expected. Don't panic. I've made sure he gets exactly what he gave. Trust Nora, trust Caleb, and take a breath. You always forget that part. Nora, Caleb, 2 names like doorways. My phone buzzed, an unknown number with a 3 on 12 area code. "Helen, it's Nora Patel." I blinked. Lily's Nora wasn't a footnote, it was real and on my phone. "Yes," I said, and my voice cracked. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "Lily made me promise to call you the day after the service. Are you alone?" "Yes." "Then listen carefully. She asked me to help you through what's about to happen. She planned for this, Helen, in ways that make me proud and make me furious at the same time." In the silence between us, I heard my own heart. It sounded like a person knocking, Nora met me at Café Selmarie in Lincoln Square because Lily loved their raspberry tarts and said they tasted like a good decision. She was early, the way people are when they've promised things to dying friends and intend to keep those promises. She slid a folder across the table. It was slim but dense, like a biography of a liar. He terminated his parental rights when Lily was 12, she said, not unkindly. Voluntarily. Your petition for back support is what triggered it. I closed my eyes. I saw that downtown office again, and the clerk who called me ma'am in a tone that made me feel both seen and erased at the same time. I remembered the way Daniel's signature looked, confident and careless, as if he thought ink couldn't haunt a person forever. He did it to avoid arrears, Nora continued. He and his attorney at the time found a narrow road and ran a truck through it. So he has nothing, I said. No claim. In a moral universe, sure, Nora said. In ours, the answer is still yes. Legally, he's a stranger. The word stranger felt right, like a coat that finally fits your shoulders. Nora tapped the folder. Lily hired a licensed investigator 2 years ago. She didn't go digging out of spite. She wanted a map. What did he find? Patterns, she said. He left you. Then he moved in with a woman in Logan Square with a small inheritance from her grandmother. When that ran dry, he pivoted to a widow in Elmhurst who owned 3 rental properties. Then a woman with a trust in Winnetka. Similar arc each time. Attention, access, extraction, exit. I swallowed. I hated that alliteration could be applied to my life. And kids, Nora added gently. Not his, biologically as far as we can prove, but kids he read to and tucked in and then vanished from. Lily reached out to some of them through their mothers. She paid for therapy, tutoring, college apps, quietly. She built something sturdier than money. I thought of Lily's desk, a mess it would have offended the tidy gods, and wondered which piles had contained these stories. My daughter had been in a war I didn't know existed, and she'd fought it softly, like a person who knows brute force only makes shards. What happens now? I asked. Nora smiled without humor. He hired Matthew Klein, because Matthew is good at making messes look like misunderstandings, but Klein doesn't know the whole picture. When he does, he'll excuse himself. Lawyers are brave until they smell fire. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Helen Parker? A male voice asked. Yes. This is Matthew Klein. I need to inform you that I'm withdrawing as Mr. Reed's counsel. There are conflicts. Of course there are, I said, and it felt like chess pieces clicking into place with a sound only I could hear. After we hung up, Nora slid another card across the table. Caleb Monroe, a state attorney. Lily admired his integrity. He'll meet us at 3. At 3, Caleb's office overlooked the river, all gray light and quiet carpet. He had a gentle face and hands that rested so still on the desk, I trusted him before he spoke. Your daughter, he said, was meticulous. Her will is airtight. Her trust is irrevocable. She provided for you, Helen, in a way that will let you grieve without counting pennies. And she endowed a foundation with a mission statement she wrote like a prayer. What mission? I whispered. To make abandonment less profitable and less survivable, he said. Scholarships, legal aid for custodial parents, counseling for children, grants for clinics like yours to maintain secure, accessible charts for families that move a lot or live on the edge. He turned a page. She also left instructions for an escalating response if Mr. Reed attempted to claim anything. Escalating, I repeated, because the word felt like an elevator we were about to get on. First tier, a letter to him. Second, release of public documents already part of the record. Third, if he keeps pushing, delivery of evidence of crimes unrelated to you or Lily, but relevant to his character and patterns. Crimes, I said, as if tasting a word for the first time. Nora nodded. Credit fraud, identity shenanigans. He's been playing shell games with debt collectors. Lily didn't want to weaponize it unless she had to, but she understood leverage. Why didn't she tell me all of this? I asked, even though I knew the answer. Because she was mine. Because she wanted to carry the weight so I could sleep sometimes. She thought she had time, Caleb said softly, and she thought she could handle it without you having to relive him. We took the elevator down in silence. Outside, seagulls wheeled over the river, hungry and ugly and determined. Chicago in March is a city that dares you to hope. I pulled my coat tighter and held Lily's letter in my hand. It felt like a spine. That night, Daniel called. The bravado had leaked out of his voice. "Hell," he said, like a man placing a hand on a closed door. "Can we talk?" "You had 15 years, I said. "You used them for other things." "There was a misunderstanding with my last attorney." "There was clarity," I said, "for once." "Elaine's left," he said. "She took our accounts. She says I lied to her about everything. She's talking to lawyers." "Good for Elaine," I said. "Don't do this," he said, panic rising like heat. "Please, Helen, I don't have anywhere to land." "You should have thought about that before you cut the rope," I said, and then I hung up because I've learned the sacred art of ending sentences. News moves like weather, slow build, sudden downpour, then that hot, wet smell when it lifts and leaves everything altered. It started with a local business blog that should have minded payroll tips and vendor spotlights. Someone filed a public records request tied to Daniel's Chapter 11 rumor and found a petition with his name, Lily's name, and a whisper of money attached. By noon, my phone rattled on the counter like it was possessed. "Miss Parker, do you have a statement about Mr. Reed's—" "No." "Helen, this is Angela from WGN." "No." "We'd like to invite you—" "No." Nora texted, "Do not engage. Let the documents do the talking." I brewed coffee and watched snow try to be rain. On the TV, a panel of people with good hair practiced surprise. "If true," one said, "this raises tough questions about—" "About what? About how a man who erased himself thinks he can draw himself back in with a Sharpie?" That afternoon, Elaine called. "Is this Helen?" Her voice sounded like glass that had been heated and cooled too many times. "I'm Elaine Whitaker, or I was until the lawyer said I should stop using his name." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it in a way I didn't expect. "He told me he didn't have children," she said. "He told me he had a clean start. We've been married 5 years. He used up 3 of them like gasoline." "I know," I said, because I did. "I'm divorcing him," she said. "I will support anything that keeps him from profiting off your daughter." "Thank you," I said, "and I'm sorry for what you have to unlearn now." She laughed, a sound like a bark pulled out of a throat. "Unlearning is expensive," she said, "but staying is bankruptcy." By the next morning, the public documents had done what public documents do, forced everyone to pretend this was about law and not about decency. Someone found the termination of parental rights order. They posted a screenshot without context or shame. The comments were a bonfire. People love a tidy morale, but this one was messy and bled. Nora called. "Tier 2 executed," she said. Caleb forwarded the letter to Daniel. "He'll be in touch." He was. He showed up on my porch in a coat that had lost its shape and asked to come in like the past doesn't track mud. I let him into the front hall because my mother raised me to suffer with manners. He held an envelope, heavy with Lily's handwriting. He opened it. He read. His hand shook once, a quiver like a piano wire after a wrench. "She knew," he said, and I thought she always did. "She knew the kind of man you became," I said. And she responded like the kind of woman she grew into. "I was scared," he said. "Back then, money, responsibility. We were all scared," I said. "Some of us stayed." He looked smaller, as if someone had let the air out of him. "Is there any way," he said, "that I can be acknowledged? Not paid, just recognized." "You were recognized by a judge in a downtown courtroom who stamped a piece of paper that said, 'Absent by choice,'" I said. "You were recognized by a child who stopped waiting at the window. You were recognized by me in every form I filled out alone." He pressed a palm to his chest as if checking whether something was still in there. "I thought I'd have time," he said. "So did I." When he left, the house exhaled. I went into Lily's room and sat on the floor with my back against her bed and thought of a day when she was 16 and determined to convince me that Java and Java were not the same thing. She made flashcards for me with doodles of cups and islands. "You're the only one who tries to learn my language," she said. I didn't understand then that she was offering me a bridge. I just thought we were being adorable. By the weekend, reporters stopped asking for comments and started asking for sources. Women sent me DMs with the kind of detail you only tell a stranger who can't hurt you more than you already are. A teacher from Oak Park whose son called Daniel coach for 9 months. A woman from Aurora who signed a HELOC because Daniel said he could flip a multi-unit in Berwyn for a quick profit. Nora compiled everything. Calm as a surgeon, Caleb scheduled a meeting. I cooked a pot of chili like my mother did when something was about to break, and someone needed to be full when it happened. The doorbell rang precisely at 2. Daniel arrived with a new lawyer who looked like a freshman trying to bluff his way into a senior seminar. His name was Jason Hawk. His tie was ambitious and poorly chosen. "We're prepared to negotiate," Jason said, as if a tone could change a truth. Caleb folded his hands. "There is nothing to negotiate. You don't have standing. That's the end of it." Jason smiled, the way boys do when they're sure a trick is about to land. "There are theories of moral inheritance," he said. "Genetic contribution, the idea that—" Nora snorted. "You came into my conference room to argue DNA royalties." Jason blinked. Daniel stared at the table. Caleb opened a new folder. "Before we end this," he said, "we're at Tier 3. Mr. Reed, your daughter requested that if you persisted past the letter and the public documents, we disclose certain evidence to federal authorities." Jason frowned. "Evidence of what?" "Fraud," Caleb said simply. "Credit instruments obtained under false identities, Social Security irregularities, asset hiding, 12 years, 3 states. The air in the room changed. That's not a metaphor. It actually shifted, like a storm front moving through, pressure dropping so fast your ears need to pop. Daniel found my face. "Helen," he said, like I was a door he could still open. You forged yourself, I said. This part is not on me. The Aegis chart offices were quiet on Sundays, the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own keys, the low mechanical sigh of the HVAC, the one elevator that never got its timing right. Nora wanted me to see where Lily's last big idea had lived, to feel it in my feet. You keep building when you can't sleep, she said. Lily did. We walked past glass-walled conference rooms named after women Lily admired. Hidden Figures names, poets, her grandmother's middle name because not all heroes are on Wikipedia. A corkboard in the kitchen still had Lily's handwriting. Thursday potluck. Bring something edible or something funny. Points for both. In a small recording room, Nora clicked a monitor on. She made you something, she said, for when you're tired of my voice. The video warmed into life. Lily in a gray sweater, hair short from chemo, a sparkle tucked into the corner of her mouth like a secret. Mom, she said, and the word broke me in half. If you're watching this, hey, sit down, drink water. She laughed. Here's the thing about plans. They're love letters to the future. This one's mine. If Daniel does what he always does, chooses money, then Caleb and Nora will walk you through my little Rube Goldberg machine. I don't want you to carry a single box I can carry for you. You hear me? I smiled and cried like a fool at the same time. Also, she added, growing fierce, to any person who thinks biology is a bag of cash they get to unzip whenever, they're going to learn a different word. Consequences. Nora paused the video. We can watch the rest later. For now, you need to know Caleb's sending the package to the U.S. Attorney Monday. I nodded. Do it. Are you sure? I was sure the night I started sleeping in a chair next to a beeping bed, I said. I'm sure now. That night, the city complained outside my window the way it does at 2 a.m. A siren, a drunk laugh, a truck exhaling. I couldn't sleep, so I opened the old cedar chest at the foot of my bed and found Lily's high school hoodie, the one that never fit right. I put it on anyway. I hadn't worn a hoodie to bed since 1983. It felt like borrowing warmth from a future I didn't get. In the morning, Caleb called. Delivered, he said. We're not in control now. Good, I said. I'm exhausted from control. At noon, Daniel texted, Can we meet? Not a question mark, which felt perfect. I let him come to the porch again because I wanted the wind between us. He looked older than last week, a man who'd been scraped. Don't do this, he said without hello. The feds, it's... Helen, I'll drop everything. You'll drop what? I asked. A claim you never had. That's not a concession, it's a confession. Prison, he whispered, as if saying it quiet made it theoretical. Lily built a world where people who do harm meet the systems designed to hold them, I said. It's not my favorite world either, but it's the one we live in. He sank down on the top step, hands dangling between his knees. I held her once, he said suddenly, like a man blurting a last defense. When she was 2, she fell asleep in the car, and I carried her in, and she smelled like Cheerios and wind. I think about that all the time. Then you should have held on, I said. He stood, swayed, and then left the way men leave when they finally realize no one is coming after them. That afternoon, I put on real pants and drove to Aegis Chart again. I sat with the team Lily had built, their grief messy and public. I told a story about Lily jury-rigging an old router with rubber bands and a chopstick and getting us back online in a storm. She liked improbable fixes, I said. She liked making things work when they had no right to. We voted to rename the recording room the love letter room because none of us could say video without crying. 2 days later, an email arrived from an address with .gov at the end. Brief acknowledgement, attached, a request for a meeting with Caleb. The kind of formal that makes your spine straighten, like a teacher just walked in. The night before the meeting, I dreamed I was back at the clinic on Western, and the waiting room was full of children waiting for someone who wasn't coming. Every chair held a folded hoodie. I walked around and tucked notes into every pocket. "Be right back," I wrote. I always tell the truth in dreams and wake up mad about it. Morning brought cold sunshine and a feeling like a set of train tracks vibrating before you see the light. Nora came with me to Caleb's office. We didn't talk in the elevator. Grief and fear are both loud talkers. They don't like competition. In the conference room sat a woman with close-cropped hair and a notebook so neat it would make nuns jealous. She introduced herself as Assistant U.S. Attorney Teresa Mills. "We appreciate the thoroughness of your packet," she said. "I'm sorry for the circumstances that led to it." Her eyes were kind and devastating. "Before we move forward," she continued, "I want to be clear. Prosecution is not punishment you control. It's a process. It could take months. It could take a year. It could resolve in a plea." "Understood," Caleb said. Ms. Mills flipped a page. "I will also need statements from some of the women your investigator identified. The ones willing to speak to patterns." Nora nodded. "We have 5 who've already signaled they will." "We'll need at least 2 willing to testify," Ms. Mills said. "And I'd like to see the original documents from the termination proceeding." I felt the floor tilt and right itself. "We have that," I said. "I kept everything, even the envelopes." "Good," she said, and the word felt like a hand on my shoulder. When we left, the river below us flashed silver and mean. Chicago looked beautiful in that ugly way it has, fully itself, no matter who's paying attention. I thought of Lily explaining hash functions to me with sugar packets at a diner. "It's math that refuses to be bullied," she said, and I fell a little more in love with the way her mind worked. Bad men rarely consider the memory of children. They underestimate its archivist precision. When Nora reached out to the women from the investigator's file, memory vaulted fences. A teacher from Oak Park, Kelsey, met us at a diner off Harlem where the waitress called everyone babe with equal sincerity. Kelsey wore a blue cardigan and the look of someone who has not slept well for 6 months. "He taught my son to throw a spiral," she said, hands around a mug like it was a heat pack. "Every Saturday morning for almost a year, he made pancakes with chocolate chips and pretended he forgot the chips until my son found them. Then he took out a line of credit for minor home repairs in my name. He was gone by October." She signed her statement with a pen that skipped and asked for a new one, and I loved her for that insistence on legibility. An accountant from Aurora, Jenna, arrived with a folder of receipts and a composure that came from doing other people's taxes for 20 years. "He didn't just lie," she said. "He curated. He put himself in the best light in every room until we all bought the exhibit." She had a kid too, no spiral throws, but hours spent gluing school projects that Daniel praised like they were moon landings. Her daughter was 13 now, sullen in the way that is a shield. "She calls him the ghost coach," Jenna said. "I told her that's better than calling him dad." We stacked their stories with care. We built a small wall against amnesia. Meanwhile, Daniel retained a new attorney with a last name that sounded like a boat. They sent a letter to Caleb claiming the rights termination had been coerced, that he'd signed under duress, that he'd been misled as to the consequences. Caleb's response was 3 sentences long and could have cut diamonds. Attached, the original petition, the advisals, the court transcript, with Daniel answering clearly and without hesitation when the judge asked if he understood. Every time he lies, Nora said, he creates another receipt. The U.S. Attorney's office moved like a glacier on fire, slow and unstoppable. Subpoenas went out. Social media whispered. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in a decade texted me a link to a thread and a string of exclamation points. I muted my phone and put on Lily's hoodie again. At Aegis Chart, the team shipped a code update that tightened an API endpoint and sent a memo Lily would have loved. You only get to be clever if you're also careful. We put it on a poster. We started saying it about everything. In the middle of all this, grief continued to be weird. I cried at a Dunkin' because they gave me a free donut for the kid, and I didn't correct them. I laughed at a funeral home commercial so hard I scared myself. I started talking out loud to Lily in the car like a Chicago lunatic and felt more normal than I had in weeks. One night, the doorbell rang and I found a girl on my stoop with a backpack and a fury she was trying to hide. "Are you Helen?" she asked. "My mom said I could come over if I wanted because you get it." "Who's your mom?" I asked, and then saw Kelsey's eyes in her face. "Come in," I said, opening the door to a child who looked like me when I was 13 and didn't know how to stand or sit without being wrong. Her name was Rowan. She liked physics and purple eyeliner and pretending not to care. We sat at the kitchen table and did homework the way you do when the homework is a decoy for a bigger problem. "You know what's stupid?" she said, pencil tapping. "That I still miss him sometimes, even though he sucks." "It's not stupid," I said. "It's your memory doing its job." "What's its job?" she asked. "To keep you from turning into the person who hurt you," I said. "You can miss the Saturday mornings without wanting the liar back." She chewed on that like gum. "Can I come here sometimes?" she asked. "My mom works late and our house feels loud when it's quiet." "Yes," I said. "You're on my speed dial now." "People still say that?" she asked, smirking for the first time all day. "Old people do," I said, and she laughed for real. She left with a Tupperware of leftover chili and a promise to text when she got home. I locked the door and leaned my forehead against it. Lily used to do the same thing after I left for work when she was little. The door, a cool, flat thing she could press her whole face to. I did it now because grief allows rituals that look the same from the outside but mean everything different inside. The next morning, Caleb called. "Indictment is likely by Friday." "Likely," I repeated, "because you learn to respect adverbs in these processes. And we need you ready for a public face you didn't ask for," he added. "A statement, if you want one." "I don't want one," I said. "But Lily built a thing that lives in the world and the world is looking." "Then write it for her," he said. "Not for them." The federal courthouse on Dearborn looks like it was designed by someone who believed in rectangles, security bins, shoe removal, the ones that beep if you even think about lying. I stood in line next to a man in a hard hat and a woman in a suit so green it had to be lucky. We were all there for different reasons and the same one: accountability. Inside, the hallway smelled like floor wax and stress. "Miss, Mills met us in a conference room with bad coffee and pastel walls that made everyone look like they hadn't slept. "We've filed," she said. "Wire fraud, identity theft, false statements, 3 counts in the Northern District, related investigations elsewhere." My knees went a little watery. I gripped the table and felt the world hold. "Arraignment is tomorrow," she added. "He'll plead not guilty. That's what they do." "I figured," I said. "Also," she said, glancing at Nora, "there's a video your daughter recorded. If you approve, we'd like to file it as part of a victim impact statement at sentencing if we get there." Nora looked at me. I nodded. "Yes." We left with a date, a docket number, and that peculiar type of relief that lives alongside dread. Outside, Dearborn whistled wind through a canyon of glass. Protesters chanted about something unrelated on the corner. Chicago contains multitudes. A man in a hot dog costume jogged past, and I thought for a second that the city itself was trying to break tension. At home, I watched Lily's video again in the love letter room. She looked tired. She looked incandescent. "Dad," she said into the lens, tone measured and merciless, "if you're watching this, it means you've made the one move I hoped you would skip. You used to say you hated puzzles. Here's mine. Every choice you made had a consequence baked into it, like a trap door disguised as hardwood. You want money for being absent? Here's the bill for all the doors you opened by disappearing." She inhaled and her eyes shifted, a flicker toward a place just above camera level where she used to put taped prompts for herself. I looked later. She'd written 3 words on a post-it. "Be very kind." The kind was crossed out and replaced with clear. "Mom and I did fine," she said. "We built a life. We loved it. We loved each other. You don't get a percentage of love." I paused the video and cried so hard I hiccuped. Then I laughed at myself, a hiccuping widow of motherhood. Then I pulled myself together because the world had invited itself in. At arraignment, Daniel wore a suit he could no longer carry. His new attorney whispered in his ear. The judge read the charges in a voice like Midwest winter, no flourishes, all fact. "How do you plead?" "Not guilty," Daniel said, and the sound felt like déjà vu. The judge set conditions. There was mention of passports, of travel restrictions, of a bail number that made old men in the back row whistle under their breath. It is strange watching a person you once kissed become a line item. Afterward, in a hallway that looked exactly like every hallway in every courthouse in America, Elaine stood near a window and didn't look at me until she did. "It's not enough," she said without moving her lips. "It won't be," I said, "ever, but it's something." She nodded once. "I have a deposition at 2, she said. "He put a credit card in my name and bought a boat. We live in Chicago. Who does that?" "A man who believes consequences don't have hands," I said. Nora squeezed my arm. "You okay?" "No," I said, "but I'm upright." "Same thing some days," she said. That night, I wrote the statement Caleb had asked for. It wasn't for cameras. It wasn't for Twitter. It was for the court and for Lily and for the part of me that refused to let my story be told only as a footnote to a crime. I wrote about the time Lily coded through a fever because thinking felt better than lying down. I wrote about the way abandonment leaves a draft you can't find the window for. I wrote about how standing at the bus stop with a second grader at 6 a.m. in January is an act of patriotism. I wrote about money being a poor metric for love and a good one for intent. Then I made tea and watched the Golden Girls until the laugh track felt like applause, for not throwing my laptop through a window. Trials aren't movies. They're calendars tossed into wood chippers, dates changed, motions filed, 1,000 small gears turning, most of them in rooms you never see, months stretched, tightened, stretched again. During discovery, the government produced bank statements with names that looked like misspellings of Daniel's own, Daniel, Donnell, Reed, a magician's trick performed badly. There were LLCs with patriotic names that did no business, and Mint accounts synced to phones he kept for 6 months and ditched. A car in Indianapolis, cash advances in Kenosha, a P.O. box in Joliet registered with a fake lease. Ms. Mills called. "We're offering a plea," she said. "Wire fraud and identity theft, the rest dismissed. Guidelines suggest 4 to 5 years. Restitution." I thought about years the way people think about distances. 4 years is long enough for Rowan to graduate high school. 5 is long enough for me to learn to sleep through the night without nightmares standing over the bed like confused guests. "Acceptable," Caleb said, professional as an iron railing. I said nothing, because even when justice fits, it doesn't heal. Daniel accepted. In court, he said the words. I did. His voice broke on the second word, and for a dangerous second I remembered him at 26, teaching Lily to whistle by making a tiny O with her mouth and telling her to pretend she was blowing out a candle. "No spit," he said, laughing. "It's about air." I held onto the table to keep from floating into my own memory. Sentencing came in June. The judge, stern, tired, human, listened to Ms. Mills outline numbers and patterns, listened to Caleb read my statement, listened to Daniel's counsel point at childhoods and addictions and the floating wreckage of a life, as if pointing at debris made it less sharp. Then he spoke. "We are, all of us, the sum of our choices and our chances," he said. "You had choices that you made repeatedly. You caused harm. You evaded responsibility. You are not unique in your misdeeds, Mr. Reed. That does not make them smaller." 4 years. Restitution. Supervised release. A payment plan that would sting, not salvage. The judge's gavel sounded like a door closing gently, which made me angrier than I expected. Outside, June had the gall to be beautiful. The city smelled like cut grass and grilled sausage and boat fuel, even though none of us should be able to afford a boat. I stood on the steps and let the sun lay a hand on my hair. Elaine came down behind me. "He'll be a better liar when he gets out," she said. "Or a tired one. Not." "We'll be better at telling the truth," I said. She nodded and laughed, sudden and ugly. "Do you know the worst thing?" she asked. "What?" "He was charming," she said. "I hate that was real." "It was," I said, "and so was everything else." Back at Aegis Chart, the team rolled out the Foundation's public site. Lily had named it the North Star Fund because we all deserve a fixed point when everything moves. On the landing page was a photo she'd insisted on, a kid's hand and an adult's hand drawing a star together, the lines messy and perfect. The mission was simple: emergency stipends for single-parent households, therapy grants, legal clinics, and scholarships for tech-minded kids who like to take things apart and tell authority to wait its turn. Rowan came to the small launch we did in the break room. She wore a cheap black blazer like it was armor. She gave a speech that started as a joke, "I don't like speeches," and ended as a howl in a language only girls with ghosts understand. Everyone clapped. Then we all ate sheet cake with frosting that stained our teeth blue because life is long and sugar helps. Summer slid toward September. I took a part-time consulting role at the clinic because I missed the lobby smell and the way people leave different than they came in, even if all they got was a blood pressure check and a joke. I started a grief group on Tuesdays at 6 in the Aegis Chart break room because therapy is expensive, even when you have money, and impossible when you don't. On a Tuesday in August, I found a sealed envelope addressed to me in Caleb's careful hand. Inside was a copy of a letter Lily had sent to a state rep she admired, outlining proposed language for a bill that would stiffen penalties for parents who terminate rights to avoid financial obligations and then reappear when money does. She called it the Child Continuity Act and wrote like a person who understood loopholes better than politicians. "You're going to hate the sausage making," Nora said, reading over my shoulder. "I'm going to make sausage anyway," I said. We did. We called, we wrote, we sat in rooms where men didn't look up when we entered, and then we sat in other rooms where women did. The bill moved like a stubborn guest through a crowded party. It got drinks spilled on it. It had to change shoes halfway through, but it kept moving. Grief ages like a bruise. It doesn't disappear, it changes color until one day you only notice it when you bump the right place. By fall, I could change the sheets on Lily's bed without sobbing. By winter, I could play her piano without hearing hospital monitors. I went to the lake when it got cold enough to scare people from the path. I liked watching the geese organize themselves like a board meeting with better outcomes. I liked the way the skyline pretended it had always been there. I said Lily's name out loud to the waves because I'm a woman who believes in saying things out loud to inanimate objects. The lake answered in its language, "Hush, hush, hush." Daniel wrote from prison. The first letter apologized for how it looked, which almost made me spit. The second letter apologized for what I did. I read them both, as if reading could be a catharsis. I answered once. Lily loved a clean, variable name. That was all. Rowan kept coming by. Sometimes she brought homework, sometimes a story about a boy who thought he invented disappointment, sometimes a poem she'd write on my whiteboard in block letters and leave without comment. She opened our fridge like a child who knows she's allowed. She took to napping on Lily's old rug with a blanket over her head while I cooked, the way a cat might trust a house. I kept a small stack of new hoodies by the door for kids who forgot coats because forgetting looks a lot like surviving. On Halloween, I made a vat of hot chocolate that tasted like childhood and waved teenagers into my warm front hall to defrost, because Chicago does not care that you worked hard on your costume. The fund grew, not big, not tech big, but steady. A letter from a boy in Inglewood who got our emergency stipend and used it to keep his mom's car from getting repossessed. A photo from a girl in Uptown wearing a second-hand blazer at her first internship. I start at 9, wish me luck. A thank you note from a grandmother in back of the yards who took 3 kids in when her daughter relapsed and needed school supplies that didn't scream donation bin. In December, the Child Continuity Act passed out of committee. I cried in a parking lot next to a snowbank with cigarette butts stuck in it like misplaced birthday candles. It wasn't law. It wasn't close. It was a room with a door now and a hallway to get there. Elaine met me for coffee and handed me a check. "Restitution," she said. "The first one. He listed me too. I wanted you to be the one to get it because pettiness is a vitamin." I took it. It felt like exactly what it was. A small measure that measured nothing at all and everything at once. On New Year's Eve, Nora and I stood on my stoop and watched fireworks pop over the neighborhood from 15 different directions, as if the city decided to practice joy in clusters. We clinked mugs instead of glasses because we are adults with teeth we pay to maintain. To Lily, she said. To clarity, I said, and we drank to both. The day the Child Continuity Act passed, the State House smelled like coffee and fear, like any workplace on a deadline. I sat in the gallery with Nora, with Rowan wearing a dress she thrifted and declared ironically earnest, with Kelsey and Jenna and 3 other women who had turned their harm into homework. The roll call began, names called, thin green lights, a smattering of no votes that felt more like habit than conviction. Then a tally that made noise happen where no noise is supposed to happen. We didn't cheer, we exhaled. Sometimes victory is letting your lungs do their job. We didn't name it after Lily. That was my choice. She hated when men named bridges after themselves. If it works, she'd said once about Aegis chart, people won't think about it at all. In the press release, a staffer wrote, "This law closes a loophole that allowed parents to exploit a child twice, first in absence, then at inheritance." I wanted to kiss that staffer on the mouth. Outside, the sun hit the Capitol dome in that earnest Midwestern way it has, making things look cleaner than they are. Rowan took a photo of our group with her arm stretched long and later photoshopped in a star over our heads that was just a little crooked. "On brand," she said. We drove back to Chicago with the radio low. I dropped everyone off and pulled into my alley and sat in the car long enough for my neighbor to tap on my window and ask if I needed jumper cables. "I'm good," I said, and realized I meant it. That night, in the love letter room, I played Lily's video one last time and then closed the file. Not to bury it, to let it rest. I opened a new document, a blank page that didn't scare me for the first time in a year, and started writing the Foundation's annual letter. I wrote about kids and codes and courtrooms. I wrote about lies and their receipts. I wrote about care as architecture. Then I turned off the lights and walked home, the winter air making me feel like I had new lungs. I passed the bench at the bus stop where Lily and I used to sit before dawn and quizzed each other on vocabulary, computer terms for her, medical codes for me. "We're bilingual," she'd said then, legs kicking, small and entirely herself. At home, I placed a new photo on the fridge. Me, Nora, Rowan, Elaine, Kelsey, Jenna, Ms., Mills, Caleb, the Aegis chart crew, and 3 kids who came to our Tuesday group, even though they don't like groups. We are all not okay. We are all okay. I made tea and stood by the window and looked at the city practicing sleep. Someone's TV flickered blue, someone's porch light stayed on all night because they were waiting for a kid to come home, someone's dog barked at a squirrel that forgot what month it was. I whispered out loud, because that's who I am. "We did it, kid." And in the quiet afterward, I heard her answer in the only language I trust now, clear and bright and mine. "Keep going."